there. Can you see it? I'm going to refresh it. Yay. And I can see your line at the top, or your browsing bar, but that's all right. Looks like we have a few people on. I haven't done this before on this system, so bear with me while I figure out a couple of things like how we can do questions and things like that. I'm working on that right now. I'm going to open the chat. Can people see the chat, or is that only? Nope. Nope, looks like not. Okay. Give me a second. I'm going to try and find another way. Yeah, right here. Look. There's a chat. Okay. Looks like we can create a chat here. I'm going to turn on a question bar. Can you all see that? And can people also let us know if they can hear us? I don't know. Are you seeing it show up anywhere? Oh, great. Oh, hi, Peggy. Oh, there are people that I didn't even know were going to be on here. This is really exciting. Cool. Thanks for bearing with me through figuring out some of these issues. I am Jess. I know lots of you. I am here with Heidi. We both work at an organization called the Carson J. Spencer Foundation. Heidi is going to kind of respond to any of the chat things that are happening. We'll take some turns with presenting. The only way that people can interact with this, it looks like, is going to be through that chat function. So please let us know if there are any issues with volume or consistency or anything else. And it looks like you can actually type into the event also. Heidi will have both open. So if you have any questions, comments, whatever, that's the place to do it. I know that this topic can be really difficult for people. Many of the people that I know are signed up to listen today have lost someone, some of you recently. So I want to make sure that if you are one of those people who has lost someone recently and you are struggling during this presentation, please reach out to one of us on Facebook. We probably won't see that until after the session is over, but we'd like to check in on you and make sure that you're all right. Some of this information can be difficult for people who have had a hard time recently or who have lost someone recently. So we're going to go through some pretty high-level information, but then give you some really practical skills about supporting someone who's thinking about suicide. All right, so the first thing that we want to talk about are some of our language norms that we use. These are the norms that have really been decided in the recovery community. So these are norms that have been decided by people who have both lost someone and are suicide attempt survivors. We typically use the term died by suicide or died from suicide and avoid terms like commit or complete. Both of those have some connotations that are uncomfortable for a lot of people. Commit sounds like a crime or a sin. Complete sounds like maybe someone did something positive. So this is a terminology that's kind of preferred in the suicide prevention world. Mental health condition is the term that we use to kind of describe any mental health challenge that someone might encounter, whether that's long-term or short-term. Sometimes I think the term illness can misconstrue what mental health is like for people and their actual lived experiences. A lot of people are less inclined to relate to a condition or relate to an illness because they feel like they're really going through something that's related to the external world around them. So we use condition because it can be temporary or long-term, and provides a little bit of a broader definition of what we're talking about. We use suicidal intensity to describe the experience of everything from fleeting thoughts of suicide all the way through maybe suicidal behaviors, attempts, suicide deaths. And we like that description because when we start talking about a suicide attempt specifically, or a suicide death, sometimes what people count as an attempt or a death gets really, really murky. And we don't really like to get into that because really the experience of suicidality, the experience of suicidal intensity is what we're trying to prevent. And then we talk about lived experience and survivorship. For us, lived experience is really any experience that you have had in your own life with either suicidal intensity or the suicidal intensity of people close to you. And survivorship is really about having survived or lived through a suicide attempt, suicidal intensity, or suicide loss. So those are the terms that we'll use, and we wanted to make sure that you all had that language available. We're going to spend a couple of minutes kind of going through the numbers. I'm going to let Heidi take over for a few minutes and talk about what suicide looks like in both the world and then a little bit more locally.
So, hi everybody, my name's Heidi. I'm really excited that everybody's here. And so just to jump right in. So before we talk about numbers, I think it's just really important. We like to start with this quote because I think it does a really good job of reminding all of us that behind every statistic that we talk about is a community of people, a life that was lost, a community of people that were profoundly impacted, families that were devastated by it, individuals who were devastated by it. So I think it's just important to remember that statistics are merely aggregate numbers with the tears wiped away. With that said, we're going to jump into sort of the suicide rates internationally first. So I'm noticing that there's a little bit of a delay when I switch slides. So, oh, there we go. Okay. So this first slide shows us a map of the world, and the countries with the darkest pink reddish color have the highest rates. And as the colors get lighter, the suicide rates go down. And so what I like to ask people is, what are some of the first things you notice? And normally when I ask that question, most people immediately notice that Russia is impacted by suicide at really, really high rates. And so we like to ask what we think might be contributing to these high rates of suicide. And what we think might be happening is, well, certainly stigma around being able to access care, stigma around being able to ask for help when you need it, admit that you need help when you need it. And so we think that that's probably impacting these areas with the darkest colors. Additionally, things that happen that can lead to high suicide rates are economic issues. So if there's a shrinking middle class, for instance, and there are huge disparities between wealth and impoverished people, that can absolutely that can contribute to high rates of suicide. Access to firearms can also contribute to high rates of suicide, and we'll sort of talk about that as it pertains to the United States. Additionally, we also, I think this is a really great time for us to also look at some of the countries with really, really low suicide rates, because we can ask ourselves, what is going on in these countries with low suicide rates that we can adapt in our communities so that we can have low suicide rates too, right? That seems like knowledge that most people would want. Having a community of connectedness is probably that's probably the one thing across all communities that really matters, that really impacts suicide, is having this community of connectedness. Whether that's a faith-based community, like many of the countries around the world, having really strong faith-based community can really be a protective factor. But any community of support, whether it's your workplace, or you have a large family, or you have a family, or you have a group of people that you connect with that can be your support system. Whatever that looks like, if you have a community of connectedness, you're way less likely to die by suicide than in places with vast areas of isolation. And that can happen one of two ways. It can happen because of physical isolation, and it can happen because of emotional isolation as well. So with that said, we're going to move on to suicide rates in the United States. Apologies to people who aren't in the United States that might watch this webinar. So if you look at the map of the United States that we have, the areas with the darkest colors have the highest suicide rates. And again, as the colors get lighter, the suicide rates go down. So this is data from 2013. I can tell you right now that the rates haven't changed much since we started collecting suicide data. This has been pretty consistent. And I think suicide data started being collected in the 80s. So, you know, we haven't, the sad part of suicide prevention is that the rates really haven't gone down a whole lot. But the good news is that there are really, really, really practical tools that if we were to give these tools to the whole, you know, to the whole world, to every person in the United States, to every person in the world, we think we'd see some really amazing things happening. So when you look at this map, you know, the first thing we notice is the Rocky Mountain region has really extraordinarily high rates. Why the Rocky Mountain region? Well, a couple of things. For one, especially in Colorado, but in the Rocky Mountain region and in Alaska, we have really high rates of gun ownership. You know, I guess as far as oh my goodness, as far as like gun control is concerned, really, I think the thing that's most important is if you know somebody that's really, really, really struggling, the best thing you can do, aside from connecting with them and making them feel supported and connected, is restricting access to lethal means, which is not something we're super excited about in Colorado, because in Colorado, people love to keep their guns to themselves. They don't want people coming in and taking their firearms away. So that's problematic for a couple of reasons. But in addition to high rates of gun ownership, we also have these vast areas of isolation. So there are places in Colorado where if you are experiencing a crisis, even just a physical health crisis, it might take you a couple, 2 or 3 hours just to get to a medical facility.
In places like Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, there are some places where it can take you 8 hours to get to a place that has a single mental health bed. So when you look at the Rocky Mountain region, that disparity in how long it could take you to physically access services is huge. Once you get out into some of those other places, it doesn't look quite like that. So you start seeing suicide rates look better.
It's also really interesting because we have so we have these vast areas of isolation where, you know, it takes people hours and hours to access the things they need to be healthy. And that's not just true for mental health services, that's absolutely true for physical health services as well. So we have this, so sort of the term for the term for part of this phenomenon would be cowboy culture or
rugged individialism.
Thank you, Jess. Rugged individualism. It's this cowboy culture, right? You pick yourself up by your bootstraps. You don't talk, we do not air our dirty laundry. We don't talk about what's breaking us down and making us feel crappy. We keep it all in. We just put it in a box and tuck that box away. And unfortunately, that's not how emotions work. So it ends up being, detrimental to people's health. So, we know that these are the types of things that affect the high rates of suicide. If you look at California and the northeast coast of the United States, you see suicide rates go way down. Why is that? Well, a couple of reasons. access to care. These are highly densely populated areas, so you know it might take you a train ride or maybe even a couple train rides to find somebody to see, but you're probably way more likely to access care in those places than if you're living in a really remote mountainous part of Colorado. Additionally, there's less stigma. So on the East and West Coast, it's way more appropriate, I guess, to talk about your mental health, to talk about who you're seeing and how often you see them and how great your psychiatrist is and how great your therapist is. It's a culture that that really protects accessing care, and that's a thing that's positive. Oh my goodness, I just lost my train of thought.
So I think some of the way we talk about when we look at population level data like this, some of the way we talk about it gets a little bit basic. So I want to make sure that we recognize that the things that we just said about some of those areas are not true for everyone that lives there. They're not true across the different identities of people who live in those areas. We're just looking at a population level. These are some of the things that we notice that are supportive of good or poor mental health services, mental health care access. Religion can be a really positive factor for people. It can also be really harmful. So when people are in some way losing their community, then that has a negative impact. So if they're losing their religious community because they're coming out as a queer identity, or if they're losing their community because they move, or there's a new pastor in their church and suddenly the type of religion that they're practicing changes really significantly, or the way they're practicing changes significantly, that can be negative. So really the most important thing, what I tell people the magic pill is when it comes to suicide, is connectedness. And this is all of this is going to be about how close are people to the things that they need, or how far away are they to the things that they need. And that can change based on geography, identity, all kinds of things. So the next thing we're going to talk about is suicide rates by age, race, and gender. This chart is a little bit complicated sometimes for people who aren't as data nerdy as I am. So I'm going to try and break it down in ways that are meaningful for other people. One of the things I want to note is that it doesn't have any information about any Hispanic or Latino identities. This is an issue with the way data has been collected. We do have some information, but not in the same context as this other information. So I apologize that it's a little bit simplified. So what that means is typically Latino people either identify themselves when they're taking these types of surveys as white, or they're identifying themselves as Native. So we see some interesting things happen because of that. But there are a few things I want to point out. First is that so I guess it's the darker of the two blues that has the highest rates toward end of life. That is white men. One of the things that people don't know about suicide is that white men actually have both the highest numbers and oftentimes the highest rates of suicide compared to other communities. I will say that there are a number of communities that we don't have very accurate data on, particularly the trans community, which I think very likely has higher rates of suicide than white men. But when we look at numbers, white men are really the majority of deaths. On the contrary, white women have the highest number of attempts, and Latinas have really high attempt rates. We actually see high attempt rates among women in general. So there are a number of reasons that we see this happening. One is that men use more highly lethal methods, but even when they don't, even when they use methods like poisoning that women tend to use more often, they die more frequently because they take higher dosages. So men are being more lethal in their suicide actions. This does not mean that men are more suicidal. I think that's really important, because sometimes the way the suicide prevention community talks about it is as if that means men are more suicidal than women, and that is not the case. Men are just more likely to die because of the methodology. American Indian and Alaska Native males, those are the terms that are used by the people who collect this data. I'm not sure that those are the best terms, but that's the ones that they use, are that kind of like off-white color. What you see happening for them is kind of the opposite of what you see happening among white men. So white men's suicide rates climb across their lifetime and spike right after retirement, although the highest numbers are in the middle years of their life. In American Indian and Alaska Native males, what we see is really high suicide rates in their teenage years. And we know that there are some significant challenges that that population faces around making choices about integrating identities and living, sort of straddling to multiple cultures. This actually looks the same in every single country all over the world where there's a native population and a colonizing population that live in the same place. What we see is the colonizing people have higher suicide rates toward their end of life, and the native population has suicide rates that are higher right around sort of early adulthood or emerging adulthood. I'm going to just pause for a second and see if anybody has questions about data so far. If you want to type those in. Cool. We'll just keep moving on then. Thanks. I'm going to turn it back over to Heidi to talk. We're going to talk a little bit about suicide in Colorado. The reason we're doing this is we have one of the largest numbers here in Colorado. And this data, we have access to a little bit more data because we live here. So we want to show you the difference between suicide, death, and some other things to put it in context.
So, you know, I feel like being that we live in America, we get data thrown at us pretty regularly, and it's not always in the best context. So it can skew the way we are sort of digesting some of that data. So in 2014, there were 52 HIV deaths, 172 homicides, 486 motor vehicle deaths, 553 breast cancer deaths, 668 flu and pneumonia deaths, 826 diabetes deaths, and just over 1,000 people died by suicide. So I think this gives sort of a good idea of how people are dying and how frequently people are dying by suicide. So suicide really is a major problem for Colorado. It's a major problem for the United States. Suicide is, it's currently the 7th leading cause of death for all people in Colorado of all ages. And it goes between the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd cause of death for youth, depending on what year it is. But pretty normally, it tends to be the 2nd leading cause of death for youth.
And that's actually true nationally as well. It's one of young people don't die very often, so it's either accidental deaths or suicides that occupy most of young people's deaths. That being said, young people actually still don't die by suicide that often. If you think about the way the media portrays suicide, you would think that it's young people who are dying most. And it really isn't. It really is adults who are dying most frequently. So we put all of our energy and effort and funding into youth suicide prevention, which is great. I think there's great reasons for doing that. But we miss all of these adults who are really struggling. And I think that because we think of suicide as a young people's issue, we also miss it among our friends and our parents and our siblings. So it's really important to remember that suicide cuts across all identities. That it is an issue that people face no matter where they're from or who they are.
And when a person experiences a significant loss by suicide, that you're at higher risk to die by suicide. And so we're going to talk about some post-vention stuff in one of our other webinars. But there are 3 parts of suicide work, and prevention and intervention are where most of all of the funding goes. But we do see this huge place where we can do all of this really great work to help connect people who are bereaved and who have survived attempts or experienced suicidal crisis on their own. And that's sort of under the umbrella of postvention, which we'll talk about later a different day.
All right, so I'm going to go through some facts about mental health and suicide. Most of what people know is misinformation, actually including counselors. Counselor education does a pretty poor job of, for the most part, there are some programs that are great, of teaching people what the facts are about suicide. So we see a lot of counselors actually going into their sessions with misinformation and actually being worse contacts for people who are struggling than their friends and family potentially could be. So we know that the vast majority of suicide decedents are white middle-aged men. We just talked about that a little bit. About 90% of people who die by suicide have a diagnosable mental health condition. That doesn't mean that they've been diagnosed. It's diagnosable. I actually don't think that really necessarily matters because the other side of that is that most people with mental health conditions never consider suicide at all. It's not an option for them. So having a mental health condition isn't like a death sentence, but sometimes people think it is, especially with particular disorders. So I hear that often about things like bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, and borderline personality disorder, that those are like death sentences. And I want to make sure that people don't believe that that's the case. We also know that communities who have experienced any kind of collective trauma are more likely to experience suicidal intensity. So this means communities that have been affected by discrimination or other types of trauma are going to be more likely to experience suicidal intensity. So really, when I think about this group that we're all a part of, the people that we care about, and most of us fall into those communities that have experienced collective trauma and are more likely to experience suicidal intensity. I also expect that there will be more collective trauma given the political direction that's going on. And we also know that during Republican presidencies, suicide rates go up. Not significantly, but there's statistical significance, but it's not a huge jump. But we know that happens, and the more Republican candidates or Republican people in office in a state, the higher their suicide rates are. And it shifts back and forth as those things change. We don't know why technically. So like I have some pretty good ideas why, but there's no research that tells us with accuracy why. But we know that Republican elected officials tend to cut social programs, support lower gun regulations, things like that. So that also contributes. So we talked about a bunch of bad news, and now we're going to talk about some good news. The good news is that having a community of connected, supportive people decreases your risk for suicide. So being able to be there for someone and be a part of that community, you automatically make people less likely to die and make people less likely to even think about suicide. It only takes one intervention to save someone's life. There is some research that shows us that just someone asking you the question reduces your level of suicidal intensity by like 10%. So if you can imagine how that must feel to someone, just being able to have that release of someone asking you, then they don't even have to do it right. They don't even have to do a good job. Just asking the question is what makes a difference for people. We're going to teach you how to do it right, but I want you to keep that in mind, is that just showing up and asking the question is going to help someone. All right, so I want to help you understand suicide a little bit more in depth as well. Most of what people know is misinformation. We're going to start out by kind of talking about a model of suicide risk. So I'm guessing some of you have seen one of those suicide risk assessment tools that has like a list of like 28 check boxes, or you've seen like, is path warm, and it stands for isolation. I don't even know what they all stand for, and I work in this field. Is path warm stands for a bunch of stuff. That is not helpful because no one remembers. I've been working in violence prevention of some kind for like 10 years. I still don't know what ISPath-WARM stands for. Currently, actively can't tell you. But this model is really what helps. So all you need to know are 3 things. When you're worried about someone, you want to figure out if you think they're at risk, you need to know 3 things. Those 3 things are, do they have a desire? Well, it starts with 2 things, actually. So do they have a desire for suicide? Do they want to? And do they have capacity? Can they? Now I'm going to complicate that a little because those questions are really stupid if they don't have more context. But really, desire for suicide comes from 2 things. One is thwarted belongingness. This is a terrible term that a researcher invented thinking that it would make sense to lay people. What it actually means is that you feel like you don't belong somewhere you used to belong. So that's thwarted belongingness. The other part is perceived burdensomeness. And this is about that person's perception of being a burden. And when I say burden, what I mean is they feel like their death, people they care about, than their life is. So that's a significant level of burdensomeness. It's not just like, oh crap, my car broke down and now I need my friends to drive me places. This is like, oh crap, my car broke down. I need my friends to drive me places. And I am so difficult to be around. And now I have to ask for more from my friends. And they don't want to do this for me. And I'm overwhelmed. And I feel like if I just went away, then it would be better for all of them, right? So that's the difference there between regular burdensomeness that we've all felt and the way someone might feel if they're experiencing suicidal intensity. The other side is that acquired capacity. So it's something that we acquire over time. Some people are born with capacity. And those people, you probably know some of them, they're natural risk takers. They're the people that are like, yeah, I'm going to go jump off of this cliff into water, which I think is like a crazy thing to do because I'm really risk averse. There are people that want to drive race cars and play really hard contact sports and all kinds of things that I, as a risk averse person, do not want to do. Some people are born with that. Some people acquire capacity because they are, it happens to them. So this can happen because they have a traumatic experience. So it could be experiencing abuse, a sexual assault, a near-death experience. Any of those things can help someone acquire capacity. What acquired capacity really is a fearlessness about death, and then being comfortable and having access to lethal means. So people who are comfortable working at heights, people who are gun owners, all of those types of people have more acquired capacity. Acquired capacity doesn't actually mean anything as far as suicidal intensity until you have the desire. But when those 2 things line up, someone has the desire, they want to, and they have that capacity, they are fearless about death, that's when we need to be worried. We all have this natural instinct to preserve our lives. Suicide is really hard. It's really hard because you have to get over that natural instinct. I've watched video of people trying to attempt suicide and seeing their bodies react to try to save them. People have to go to great lengths to kill themselves. So that desire has to be incredibly strong to overcome that biological urge for self-preservation.
I also think that that's really important to remember because when we go out into the world, we often hear things from people who are grieving or people who just know of a suicide or love somebody that's been affected by a suicide. And so their natural reaction or response to it is, oh, well, that person was really weak and really selfish. When you can tell by that model that it takes both a selflessness and an immense amount of strength to be able to do that, albeit twisted. But you know, so you know, I think the model does a really great job at challenging some of those preconceived notions or myths that we've been conditioned to believe over the years about suicide. Okay, it's my turn. So suicide is a journey. Okay, it starts with a thought. And then a person goes from thinking, so this can be the first fleeting thoughts of suicide, going through a hard time, starting to feel like your resources and outlets are it's sort of like getting tunnel vision, where the deeper and deeper you go into crisis, the less the less options you see, the less alternatives you see. And so suicide sort of becomes this one singular solution. So it starts with a fleeting thought. A person will then go on to decide on a method. So I think this is really important. Well, I'll come back to it. Following that, people will access the means. They will then commit to a time and place, and after that follows the attempt and or death. So a couple things are important. This journey can be interrupted at any point in time. Anybody can intervene during this journey. This journey can take years and years and years and years, or it can take just a few moments, depending on who the person is. With young people, we see sort of this impulsivity, so the journey ends up working a lot more quickly than what we see in adults, but sort of that's also well, yeah. So I think this is, what I really want to sort of emphasize with this is a couple of things. You can intervene at any point in time. And so whether you're worried about somebody who's just thinking about suicide, or you know that somebody has accessed the means to be able to do it, you are capable of intervening, asking the question, and connecting them to care. The other thing is that there's this myth out there. There are many, many myths about suicide that exist in this world. One of those myths is that if you stop somebody from dying by suicide, well, they'll just pick another method and die that way. When the research shows us that that's actually not true. People who experience suicidal intensity perseverate or ruminate on a specific method to die by suicide. And there are plenty of articles, and there's plenty of research that's been done to show that if you restrict access to a person's means to die by suicide, that it is very, 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 very unlikely that they will pick a different method to die and use that method and then attempt and die. In order to be able to fight that natural biological sort of power of keeping us alive, we really have to focus on something for a long period of time. We have to get comfortable about that means of, or with that means of dying. That means if we have a firearm in the home, we have to get comfortable with that firearm to be able to use it against ourselves. That means that if somebody were to take that firearm that we've gotten comfortable with out of the home, we're not going to go jump out in front of traffic instead. That's just not really how it works. So if you start to feel like, oh, I'm really worried about this person, we've taken this method of this lethal method out of the home, we're still really worried, what if this person chooses another method? Rest assured that it's very, very unlikely that that would happen. Okay, so now we're going to go over what we call invitations to the conversation. So there are a whole handful of different invitations that people will give to you to show you that, hey, this is a time to go ahead and have the conversation, ask about what's going on. So the first type of invitation to have this suicide conversation are direct invitations. This is really straightforward, doesn't leave much to the imagination. I've decided to kill myself. I wish I were dead. I'm going to commit suicide. I'm going to end it all. And if such and such doesn't happen, I'll kill myself. So sometimes we do hear these things, but sometimes we don't. I would say, at least in my personal experience, that the kind of invitations that I normally hear tend to be these indirect invitations, which is the second type of invitation. So this would be a little bit more coded, a little bit more covert, but still lead you to believe that this person is thinking about suicide. So this could be, I'm tired of life. I just can't go on. My family would be better off without me. Who cares if I'm dead anyway? I just want out. I won't be around much longer. Or pretty soon you won't have to worry about me. Another one I've heard pretty frequently is, I just want to go to sleep and not wake up. So a lot of, I would say, many of these invitations, people just sort of use regularly in their vernacular. And so, fine, okay, people can say whatever they want. And I hope that they're not serious about it. So I think the second part of this is remembering that the more invitations that you observe in a person, that's just more reason to have this conversation, right? If you're getting more than one invitation, that means conversation's good to go. Now you can ask, this is a good time. So the third type of invitations are behavioral invitations. These are behaviors people exhibit that would make you believe that they're thinking about dying by suicide. So I just realized that this is a typo in this slide. So behavioral invitations would be acquiring lethal means, so stockpiling pills, or oh wait, I'm sorry,
it's just taking a while to catch up. It'll get there. Go on, Heidi.
The technology doesn't speak as fast as I do. Okay, acquiring a gun or stockpiling pills, depression, moodiness, hopelessness, putting personal affairs in order. So for a young person, this might look like cleaning out a bedroom or cleaning out a locker. But for older folks, giving or putting personal affairs in order might look a little different, especially because last will and testament, that sort of stuff, it's totally legal. So people do that. That's sort of, that's called end of life preparation. So being able to decipher between what might be somebody just being a responsible person versus somebody that's thinking about suicide. So giving away prized possessions, especially pets. Someone starts giving away their pets, that's time to worry. Sudden interest or disinterest in religion. Drug or alcohol abuse, especially after a period of sobriety or recovery. Relapse can be a really hard, difficult time for people who have struggled with substance abuse. And then unexplained anger, aggression, and irritability, which because of social norms tends to show up more often in men than women, but not always. And then the last type of invitation is a situational invitation. So this would be situations that a person might be in that might contribute to their suicidal ideation. So being fired or laid off, a recent unwanted move, loss of any major relationship, death of a spouse, a child, or a best friend, especially if by suicide, sudden unexpected loss of freedom or fear of punishment, anticipated loss of financial security. I have to sneeze. Oh my God, hold on.
I'm going to take over while she sneezes. An anticipated loss of financial security. So if you feel like your job is suddenly at risk, or you might lose everything in the stock market, or a sudden illness and you're not going to be able to be employed, that kind of stuff.
Sorry, the sneeze went away. Suicide's scary. It scared it away from me anyway. Loss of a cherished therapist, counselor, or teacher, again, especially if by suicide. Fear of becoming a burden to others.
So next, I'm going to talk about some recommendations for people or organizations that are going to interact regularly with people with suicidal intensity. I just want to go over these a little bit briefly before we get into actually asking the question, which is up next. So the first thing you'll want to do is make sure you're developing good relationships with local agencies that you can refer people to. You want to create a practitioner referral list. And what that means is make sure, so there are a lot of people who don't have good suicide prevention training or intervention training who are therapists. So you'll want to know what therapists you want to refer someone to. The Lifeline is all run through an accreditation system. And my dog might start barking in a second because he heard something. Sorry if you hear Chihuahua barks in the background. You'll want to make sure that you have a really good list of people who are really qualified to do that work. If you're interested in working on that list, we can give you some recommendations for what you might want to ask people. Anytime you're going to have any client interactions, you'll want to incorporate screening for suicide risk, but in a way that's respectful and is collaborative. So it's not just like, hey, are you suicidal? Check the box, but really working with people and using some of the approaches that we're going to talk about in just a minute. Make sure that you have policy and procedure for working with people who are going to experience suicidal intensity, and develop protocols for postvention. So what do you do if a suicide occurs of a client or someone that you're interacting with? All right, so the first thing that we want to talk about as far as asking this question, I know we did lots of lead into this, is getting yourself ready. I call these pre-conversation skills. So to prepare yourself to have these conversations, the first thing that you have to do is check in about your own beliefs about suicide. Do you believe that suicide is a sin? Do you believe that people are going to hell? Do you believe that people who are suicidal are selfish? If those are beliefs that you hold, you need to have a way to put those off take those off the table when you're interacting with someone, because those beliefs will become very apparent to someone when they're struggling. The next thing that you need to be able to do is get ready to hold space for someone's pain. I attempted suicide in high school, and one of the things that I remember the most about getting therapy afterwards was that my therapists were so uncomfortable with the amount of pain that I was in. So it's okay to have discomfort about pain, but if you're feeling that way, you really need to own it with that person. So be willing to create space for them to be in pain around you, and for you to be able to say, this amount of pain is really hard for me to see. It must be even harder for you. Really be able to acknowledge your own limitations while also honoring their experience. You also want to be comfortable with silence, tears, and anger. And I can tell you, for me, anger is the hardest one. So I have a network of a number of friends who experience suicidal intensity, sometimes often, and sometimes sort of like cyclically. And the hardest thing for me personally is some of the anger that people have. But anger is a really common response to pain. How many times have you stubbed your toe and then like yelled at your partner? I've like done this maybe in the last 2 weeks. I've been like, oh, God damn it, John, like, why did you leave whatever on the floor? It's not his fault that I'm experiencing pain, but I'm going to blame it on him because I'm in pain, right? So that's something that happens with this emotional pain as well. So you'll want to be able to just be comfortable and understand that that anger isn't about you, that it's really a pain response. Now, if there's anger that is threatening or scary to you, you are absolutely allowed to remove yourself from that situation. You never have to put yourself at risk. But I think it's good to expect that anger could be involved. Okay, so once you've prepared yourself, we have a formula that we use to help you ask the right series of questions or say the right series of things. This is a validated, evidence-based formula that we've kind of infused with some of the big tenets of social justice work and the work of the recovery movement or the consumer survivor movement. So this looks a little bit different than what you might see in a typical suicide prevention training, but it is all based in real evidence and lived experience. So the first thing you're going to do is set up the conversation. You can put all of this into your own words in any way that makes sense for you, but I set up the conversation by saying, I've noticed, and then I list specific things I've noticed and talk about why I'm concerned or that worries me. So it can be things like, I've noticed that you've been drinking a lot, and I know that when you drink a lot, sometimes that means that you are going through something emotionally that's really overwhelming, and I'm worried about you. This is having a negative impact on your life, and I love you, and I don't want to see that happen. The next thing is to validate their experience and directly ask them about suicide. So the way I set this up is by saying, given what you're going through, it would be understandable if you were thinking about suicide. I'm wondering if that's true for you. Or have you been thinking about killing yourself? So there are lots of ways you can rephrase this, but I think the thing that's most important is saying it's understandable. People who have been through the things that you have been through sometimes think about suicide. We don't want to take suicide off the table. If we tell people suicide's not an option, they know that that's not true. So what we're doing is really creating an alliance with them and saying, I get it. I understand why you would think about this, because what you're going through is hard. And when people go through that kind of stuff, sometimes they think about killing themselves. So I just phrased that for you like 3 or 4 different ways. So hopefully you can come up with your own approach. I'll also put a PDF of these slides in the Facebook group so you can all see them. So you don't have to, I should have told you that like, 20 slides ago, but you don't have to take furious notes.
Can I just add real quick? The reason why we use the direct language, I'm wondering if you're thinking about killing yourself, or I'm wondering if you're thinking about suicide, is because if you don't ask direct questions, you will not get direct answers. So asking somebody if they're thinking about hurting themselves actually sort of confuses the situation, because for many people, so myself included, I am an attempt survivor. I've been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, and I experience pretty chronic suicidal intensity. Although some days are harder than others, some days are better than others. But the one thing that I can share from my personal experience is that if someone were to ask me if I was thinking about hurting myself, I will tell you right now that when I'm in crisis, suicide is the thing that's going to end the hurt. It's not the thing that's going to make the hurt worse. It's not the thing that's going to cause the pain, right? The pain already exists, and suicide is a solution to my perceived problems. So using that direct language, asking people if they're thinking about suicide, or asking people if they're thinking about killing themselves, it gets right to the issue. There's no reason to beat around the bush or to use soft language. This is not the time to do that. We want to be very direct so that we give permission to the person that's struggling to be direct with us.
And I think this is something that Heidi and I practice frequently with each other and some other people in our network. I actually don't even do any of like the lead-in stuff with Heidi. I'll just be like, hey, today seems hard. How much suicidal intensity are you feeling right now? How worried do we need to be? What kind of safety plan do we need to put in place? I wouldn't recommend just starting there with anyone you don't know, but once you have a relationship with someone, I think that's totally appropriate. So here's the thing that I think is really important and really different about what we teach people than what anyone else teaches, is as soon as someone tells you, yes, I'm thinking about suicide, you say, thank you for trusting me. And I can tell you, it is not what they are expecting you to say. I actually like that. I like that it catches people off guard, because it makes them take a step back and think, and it almost takes them out of that crisis mindset that they have. Anytime someone is in crisis and they have to take a step back and think something through, it pulls them out of crisis. So that's what I use this for. This also establishes an alliance with them, right? You're on their team. So you've already established the alliance by thanking them, but you're going to do it again in a little bit. Once you thank them, ask them to talk more about what's going on. They might already be doing it. You might not even need to ask them. But usually people have not gotten to talk about this stuff because there's so much shame and guilt. So if you just provide the opportunity and say, tell me more about what you're going through. This sounds really hard. What else is going on? They're going to want to talk about the things that they're experiencing. If they don't want to, that's okay too. And you can start making some connections for them. The next step is what I call creating connectedness. And that's really just about making sure they know that you're on their team. I don't like to say I'm on your team. Basically anything that's like sportsy doesn't sound natural coming out of my mouth. But stuff that is a little bit more, I think I use a little bit more direct language, and I just say, I'm going to be in this with you. Like, I'm here for you. I know I can't feel your pain for you, but I'm going to stick through this with you. That feels a little bit more comfortable to me. You can say it any way you want. And then you have to say, I have some ideas that might help. And you say that even if you have no ideas, because you all have Google on your phone, so you do have ideas. And if you feel like you don't, it's just because you're freaked out, and that's okay. But I'm also going to give you some specific resources. So I think this is important. I have some ideas. I have some ideas. Remember to say that, because they're out of ideas. That's why suicide is front of mind. We need to present them with some alternatives. You need to be able to say, what if we try this? What if we try this? And that's how you give them alternatives to suicide, because they haven't found them on their own. Okay, so a few resources. Many of these you've all seen, but there's the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. They also have a chat. 1-800-273-TALK is their phone number. The crisis text line. I love crisis text line. I'm on their advisory board. I think they're awesome because they work for anyone who's in any kind of crisis. So like it doesn't have to be about suicide. And sometimes people can't name their own crisis. So this is why this stuff is important. So to use crisis text line, you text 741-741, text START to 741-741, and then you'll be able to have a conversation with someone. They have volunteers all over the US. It is entirely volunteer run by some of the most incredible people I've ever met. I love them. I think they're wonderful. The Trans Lifeline, we also know very well. The two women who run the Trans Lifeline are incredible. I feel privileged to know them and be in their company. They work tirelessly, and they also have a really specific policy that they will not send emergency services to someone who doesn't want them because of the issues the trans community faces with emergency services. And I think that that's, I love that they're taking a social justice approach to that work and being willing to do that, take a stand about it. So that's a great contact if the person you're working with or sitting with is trans. Live Through This is a website that has stories of hope and recovery from suicide attempt survivors from all over the United States. I think actually all over the world. It can be really helpful for people to see other people who have struggled and are doing well now, to read their stories and see their faces. So definitely check out their website. We also know the person who runs that well, and she's another incredible person. The Trevor Project is for LGBT youth. You can contact them. And then Now Matters Now is, I think, this is one of my favorite resources because it has real suicide attempt survivors talking about the skills that they use when they're struggling. So this is kind of one of those things that can fill the gap. So like if you can get someone out of crisis to decide that they're going to access a resource, then this is a place that can give them some skills to use in between. So not everyone needs a mental health resource. If every therapist in the United States had the best training for suicide prevention that exists, we still don't have enough therapists. We would have to have every therapist having 60 clients on their caseload who are all actively suicidal, just to meet the needs of the suicide burden in the United States. We don't have enough therapists for this, but we don't need everyone to access mental health services necessarily. What we need to be able to do is get people out of crisis and help them find what they need. And you can help them find what they need by asking them, because sometimes it's not about mental health. Sometimes it's about homelessness. Sometimes it's about not being accepted because you're trans. Sometimes it's about a financial crisis. Sometimes they need these practical, simple things that there are resources in the world available to them. And all they need is for you to say, okay, I know you're struggling. Let's look at some alternatives for how we can get you there, how we can get you through. So once someone says yes, once you thank them, then you find the resources that are most appropriate to them. And if you don't feel like you can be on this journey with them, that's when you call in the reinforcements. Or if they feel like they're going to need more support, or someone to call in the middle of the night, or someone to text right now, then that's when you can use these resources. But really, it's about getting them through that crisis and then finding out what it is that they need. The mental health system has done some really horrible things to suicide attempt survivors and to people living with mental health conditions, and they still sometimes do. Both Heidi and I have had experiences that were really, really horrible in the mental health system. The mental health system also saved my life. That's not true for everyone. I know of people who have died in treatment, in inpatient care by suicide. So I don't think that the answer is always directly refer them to a mental health resource. But any of these hotlines can help support them and you can help them look for resources too. So if what you need to do is hand them off, this list of resources is the place to go. If not, then you can sit with them and you can make a plan for how to keep them safe, because they know, because they gave you an invitation to ask them about what was going on. And they did that because they're afraid and they want help. So after you've gone through this process, you'll want to make sure you follow up. Ask them if whatever plan they put in place is working. Help them problem solve if there's more problem solving. There's probably a whole lot more listening to do. I've been doing some research with suicide attempt survivors recently. And one of the things we found is that engaging in activism is really meaningful for people, even when they're in some of those worst, most difficult parts of their struggle. So engage people in activism if it's something that they're comfortable and okay with doing. That can be a great place for people to find community and make meaning out of this horrible experience they're having. I wouldn't pressure them into it, but it's always something you can put on the table. All right, any questions, comments, concerns right now?
Go ahead and type them into the chat. Or if you're not, type them into the chat. That's easiest.
Yeah.
You're also welcome to contact Jess or I. You can find us through the Facebook group where Mafia says so. If that's how you want to get in touch, feel free.
Mm-hmm. And here's our email. We created an email address. We're going to do a series of webinars. So we created an email address just for this because we want to be a little more radical than we're allowed to be at work with all of you and say things that our work wouldn't necessarily let us say. So here's how you can get hold of us if you want to by email. I hope people are still there. I can't really tell if it's still working, but thank you all for listening. And I ended almost on time, which is incredible for me. So we'll stick around for questions if anyone has any.
Thanks, guys.
Awesome, thanks. It sounds like this was helpful for people. I hope so. I will be figuring out how I put this. I think it's just on YouTube now. I've never done this before, so we'll see. I'll put it in the Facebook group for everyone to watch. I will also put a PDF of the slides in there. We'll do that right now. And yeah, thank you all for participating. And we'll have some more next week if you're interested.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.